Hello guys, this is Panzermeister36. Today's video is going to be something a little bit different. Recently I got a number of comments in which people were asking me how I find my references for my builds, and I thought this was a really interesting topic, so today we're going to look at that while I paint this model right here. So to begin, a lot of what I will look through is some of my book collection. Now I don't have a very big book collection because I'm kind of a poor student, so books are quite expensive. But they do have some really good references in them. Nice quality photos. You can see nice weathering, and also of course really nice camouflage patterns. But I don't have that many books, so I'm not really going to recommend any specific ones to you guys today. What I really use the most for references recently is good old-fashioned Facebook. I know some people don't like Facebook for various reasons, but I'm on there mainly just for these modeling groups because there's always so much good content there. Not only models, but also historical photos, as you can see here. This is the group called StuG III. It's very well organized. They got all these subcategories where you can go look in and find specific modifications or types of vehicles. It's really good. So for sure, Facebook is a nice free resource. So StuG III, Schwerpunkt, and also Panzer Research and Reference would be the three groups that I recommend the most, but there are dozens and dozens. For weathering, I usually look at books and magazines. I've got, of course, Renali's tank art books, and these are my absolute favorite go-tos for weathering references. These books are super high quality, and they're also really informative. They're really well made. They're really well explained. Renali's books are my favorite weathering books, as I said before. They're amazing. I also do like magazines, but I kind of stopped subscribing to all these magazines recently because a lot of them aren't as good as they used to be. So instead I'll just pick up individual issues if I see an interesting article. Like for example, this one here caught my eye because of this beautiful KV1. So I just picked this up as an individual magazine. And of course there's also plenty of good weathering reference on Facebook as well in these modeling groups once again. And I guess I'm going to do a little bit of self-promotion here, but there's plenty of great YouTube tutorials on weathering, not only my own, there's plenty of other guys out there who do great jobs on this kind of stuff. And also this is great because you actually see it happen in front of you. So how do I use these photos? Well, let's look at an example here. On this StuG III I did a few years ago in a full weathering video. For example, the weathering right here on the front, you can see I copied from this photo here. The T-34 stowage bin on the back was inspired by this photo here with the T-34 bin on the side. The style of spare tracks on the side of the armor and the camouflage pattern as well were inspired by this photo. And then also the overall kind of like half painted spare track armor sort of thing there, half camouflaged, was inspired by this photo here. Now on this tank here, which I did a video on painting field applied camouflage on a number of years ago, I kind of went with this camouflage pattern that was rough outlines with some kind of like zigzag filled in, really crappy looking effect, and that was inspired by these two photos here. I do love me a crappy camouflage. So as you can see, I'll usually kind of put a few photos together. I'll take maybe the camouflage from one vehicle, interesting markings from another one, and then stowage and other stuff from another photo. And then I'll kind of put them all together into one model to make it really interesting and have a few different standout features. On the kit I was going to do this video on today, originally I was going to go with the box art scheme with this cursed camouflage of an SS division, which I think is really cool, and I'm still going to do it someday. I also wanted to do this effect here where some of the side skirts are fallen off and they're not camouflaged with the rest of the vehicle. That's something you see often because these things always fell off. So like I said, I was going to go with that cursed camouflage originally, but then I saw this photo here, and I really loved the side skirt camouflage on this one, so I decided to go with that instead. Alright, now let's get started on painting this model. Here is the Dragon StuG III we're going to be looking at. I did a video on this kit recently. I'll tag it up in the top corner here for you guys. As you can see, we have a few features on this model, like a metal barrel, a lot of photo etch, actually a fair amount of photo etch on the stock kit, and then we also have the metal side skirts, which are quite big and definitely need some primer. So I'm going to give the side skirts a coating of this Tamiya Fine Surface Primer of the red color. My method of doing this is just to super glue them to like just shish kebab or skewers here, these big sticks, and then I assemble a cursed flower arrangement on a piece of styrofoam here, and I'll go spray these outside where it's not that stinky. I'm going to disassemble the model before painting, get rid of all the road wheels and tracks and stuff like that are going to be a little bit tricky. We got to paint the rubber and everything like that separately anyways. And I'm going to go ahead and not even bother priming this thing. I'm going to try these new Tamiya lacquer paintos. Paint, I know, it just looks like painto. Because these are quite new in America at least. We've had them in Canada for a few years, but I definitely want to give these a shot. The colors I'm using are the new ones that are equivalent to like Hull Red and NATO Black. This red hull color is actually quite nice for the German red primer color, which is important because I'm going to actually do a little bit of hairspray chipping to get some initial weathering effects on this model as part of the painting process. So I'm just going to give the model an overall thin coat of this stuff. I've thinned it about 60% with a Mr. Color Leveling Thinner 400 lacquer thinner, and these things spray real smooth. I'm just going to quickly flush my airbrush out before I move on to the next color because I don't need to do a deep clean if I'm just doing the initial base colors. Not too important. So quick clean, back flush it. Yeah, I know it's kind of quick and dirty, but it's fine. Yeah, it's clean enough for me for the next color. Now let's look at how I paint the wheels. Instead of putting them on sticks or something like that, I will just hold one half of it with my gloved hand and paint the other half black. I do that one by one, and then by the time I finish painting the last wheel, the first one's already dried, so I can hold the painted side and then just spray the unpainted side black, repeat the whole process through the wheels, and it goes by really, really quick. So as you can see, here's our finished base coating. I also painted the barrel with the same black color because that's the correct primer, as with the periscopes as well. Tracks were painted with a mixture of Tamiya Japan Ground Self-Defense Force Brown and NATO Black in about 50-50 mix. Again, thinned about 60% with thinner. Alright, so for our base color, we have a lot of options for German yellow that I have in my collection. I've got even more than this. This is just like a few varieties. And they all look basically the same. We could also, of course, mix up our own color using a few different of these. But once again, I want to try out these new Tamiya lacquer paintos. So we're going to go with LP55 for the base color. This is roughly equivalent to the standard Tamiya XF88. They're close enough, so whatever, we'll give it a shot, see how it looks. Before that, I'm going to give the model 2 thin misty coats of hairspray. This is Tresemme Ultrafine Mist from Control. I'm going to mist it on in a couple of thin coats. Don't flood the surface. The first time you do this, it's going to feel like you have not applied enough. Just a little bit, and it's all you need, because if you have too much, it'll make the chips really big and unrealistic. So now we're going to mix up our base color here. This is Tamiya LP55, like I said, the new lacquer colors. I'm going to just pour some in my airbrush. This video is going to be a little bit more like, I'm going to show you a little bit more in depth of some of these kind of like steps here and how I thin the paint and stuff. Yeah, so there you go. Some more Mr. Color Leveling Thinner. People call this stuff unicorn tears because it thins everything so well and so smoothly. And I'm going to put in enough that the paint runs nicely down the side of the cup. Usually it's about 60% thinner to 40% paint. And now I'm spraying this on over top of the hairspray. Remember, we've got the red primer and then 2 thin coats of hairspray, and then this is on top of that. That hairspray is the key because that's what's going to give us the chipping effects we're going to do later. As for right now, I'm just going to build up the base yellow in a few thin coats. You can see I'm not getting the full coverage in one pass. I'm going over each area a few times to build up the paint in a few thin layers. That way we get a nice smooth application and not too thick of a coat that we have trouble chipping or fill in details and stuff like that. On the wheels we painted earlier black, I simply use these wheel masks to paint the inside of them yellow and the back of them with the primer red color as well. Alright, now our model is base painted in the yellow. For the hairspray chipping process, I leave this maybe 10-15 minutes to dry. basically as long as it takes me to clean my airbrush out. By that point the paint's dried to the touch and we can start the chipping process. I'm going to use a little bit of water here in a cup, and I have a selection of brushes and a little wooden skewer as well to help with the chips. Got a 1/8 inch angular shader, a small round brush, and then just a wooden skewer. You can use whatever brushes you want. I like to use these very fine ones for lots of control. I lightly soak the brush in a little bit of water, and I can begin rubbing at edges, and this will create chipping effects because of the hairspray we have applied between the primer and the base yellow. Basically the water will soak through and dissolve the hairspray a little bit, which will then flake off in small little chip patterns, and then that will reveal the underlying red primer color we painted earlier. This technique definitely takes a little bit of practice to know kind of the right amount of hairspray and so on to use, so I recommend you try it first on a model you don't care about or a painting mule or something like that. But once you get the hang of this, I personally think it's a great technique because it definitely, at least for me, is faster than brush applied chips. Brush applied chipping this model probably would have taken me like 5-6 hours. This took 2 hours maybe at the most, an hour and a half, including the extra layers like, you know, painting the red primer first, hairspray, and then the yellow, instead of just painting the yellow and then painting red chips. It's still faster for me this way. And I really like how the chips, they always look so good because it's like real chipping effects. You'll note that I keep the chips mainly around areas that would see the most wear and tear. So for example, I'm doing them around the edges of hatches that would see frequent use and handling by the crew. I'm also doing it on areas kind of near the fenders or the front where there's going to be like branches and stuff kicking up against the vehicle. Also think about areas where the crew would walk up and down the vehicle. And of course, basically any corner is going to get caught by something, right? So for these periscopes I painted earlier with the black, I'm going to roughly clip them off the sprue. Don't bother with cleanup because you can't see the bottom of them. I pop them into the cupola and then simply glue them into place. I find doing them separately like this is much faster painting and also a lot easier because you don't have to get in there with your paintbrush between the cupola rings and everything and paint them black. This way here is way faster. Alright, so here's our model base painted, and with the hairspray chipping technique we've already got our base chipping effects applied. Another reason why I love the hairspray chipping technique is that, you know, the chips kind of happen as you paint. Definitely takes a step ahead in the weathering process. As you can see, I've kept the chips around the corners and everything like that I was talking about, and the fine pattern I achieve with my paintbrushes by gently rubbing the surface with the water achieves some very convincing looking chipping effects. Again, this technique takes practice and it's very easy to overdo it. So like I said, try it out on something first, use less hairspray than you think you need to, and keep that top layer of paint over top of the hairspray nice and thin so that you can get nice in-scale chipping effects very easily. I love this effect, it looks so good. Also, you can see I've done a little bit of base painting of the tools and stuff like that. I'm going to briefly cover the paints I used for those. So the smoke grenades were painted with German Field Gray from AK Gen 3. Spare tracks were painted with AK Gen 3 chocolate chipping color. The wooden areas of the tools were painted with Panzerrace's 310 Old Wood, which is my favorite wooden color. Metal tools were painted with AK Gen 3 Basalt Gray. And the canvas cover for the barrel cleaning rods on the engine deck here was painted with model color German Camouflage Black Brown. Same color was used for the Bakelite end knobs on the wire cutter handles, and the handles themselves were first painted with the same Panzerrace's 310 Old Wood color we looked at earlier for the wood, and then I gave them a thin glaze of this AK Gen 3 Deep Red for that reddish tint. Alright, now with our model completely painted, let's move on to applying the markings and decals. So I have a lot of decals I collect, and I store them all in a big bag in this box. I try to organize them, never works out, they're just a mess. But this is very useful if you're trying to make a marking option that isn't, you know, one given in the kit. You want to make something a little bit different like I do today. So I'm going to go with these sheets here to make my references. I'm going to use the numbers from this Ferdinand set here I'm going to use these barrel kill marks. I'm going to use some leftover crosses from something. And I'm going to use this license plate set here to make a hull number. These numbers are super small. So my process for decals is to soak them in a little bit of warm water for about a minute or so. And my surface prep involves no varnishes at all, no gloss varnish, just microsol right over the semi-matte paint surface. You can see I prep the surface with that a little bit just to soak it with some microsol. And then once the decals are ready to go, they're moving on the paper, I will simply take them out of my little puddle of water, soak off as much water as I can, and then we apply them to the surface using a paintbrush. Again, there is no gloss varnish on there. You don't need a gloss varnish for decaling, as long as your paint is decently smooth, even if it's matte. So now I'm pressing the decal into place, making sure there's no air bubbles underneath it. I use a big soft brush for that part. And then we apply more microsol over top to soften the decal and make sure that it adheres well to the surface and snuggles down nicely with no silvering, air bubbles, etc. Again, I'm pushing it a little bit in the surface here, but that's basically it. I don't use gloss varnishes and I don't use microset for my decals. One thing I wanted to do on this model was to put the hull number stencil on the vehicle, which is something you see sometimes and it's pretty cool. So based off of a bunch of photos I found of various vehicles, as well as surviving vehicles, as well as some of my books here, I was able to actually pin down the precise hull number of basically a vehicle built in like the first week of May 1943 at the Alcat factory. That was pretty fun doing a little bit of math there to figure that out. But there we go, there's my hull number using some license plate numbers. I think that's a pretty cool little feature there. So for numbers, I wanted to go with this style here where we've got these kind of hollow numbers in the rear of the hull. I don't think it's exactly accurate for Kursk, maybe, I don't really care. It just looked really cool. So I found some numbers meant for a Ferdinand at Kursk, and I just put them on the back here. Number 24, why not? Same process, no matte varnish, just microsol beforehand, put them on, press them down, more microsol after that, and then gently push them down again to make sure they're nice and flat. So I left that to dry, and our decals look great, no silvering, no problems at all. And I think we're now ready to get started with these side skirts. Yeah, I bet you forgot about those. I almost did too. So these were primed outside with some Tamiya primer, and now I'm going to paint them with some Tamiya LP55, which is the same color we used for the vehicle itself. No hairspray chipping on these because of the metal surface. I'm worried about the paint flaking off. So I'm just going to pop them off the sticks. I'm not going to worry about exposed metal because we're going to put mud on the inside of these later, so it doesn't matter. And I'm going to assemble them on the model, starting with the rear and working to the front to get the correct overlapping effect where they kind of pop over the one behind it. Hard to explain, but hopefully you can see that here they kind of lean over the one behind them. So previously I was using my Badger 105 Patriot airbrush for the base painting and all the other stuff like that. That's a good airbrush, but for fine camouflage work I'm going to switch to my Badger Renegade Chrome, which is a much finer needle, much better for spraying tight edges. We're going to use Tamiya LP29 green for the olive green camouflage color. This is roughly equivalent to the Tamiya XF89 if you're not using the lacquer colors. There's plenty of greens that look good enough for this effect. And as before, we're going to be thinning it with Mr. Color Leveling Thinner 400. And I'm going to freehand this camouflage on the side skirts based off of those photos I was showing you earlier. So my method here is to first kind of like sketch the outline of the pattern to kind of get a feel for it and to make sure we keep some nice tight edges, and also to make sure we don't have wide, unrealistic looking bands. We want kind of squiggly edges, something that would be possible for somebody in 1/35 scale to be able to do with their arm. Their arm isn't massive, they can't do the whole side in one pass. So it's all little squiggles. As you can see, after I outlined it, I will now go in and start to fill in the inside of it with a solid color. It doesn't have to be 100% solid because this is a field applied camouflage, so it's okay if it's a little bit messy. But I'm trying to keep it looking pretty tight and in scale because I want it to look like it was sprayed on by a 1/35 scale man, not by a 1:1 scale man. Same process here. First we outline the camouflage stripes to make sure that we have something that we like, of course, and also to make sure that we have a nice tight edge. And then we go in afterwards and fill it in. Again, if you do a big wide sweeping motion, your bands aren't going to look nearly as in scale as if you do it this way, outlining, then filling. So after I was done, I realized that I had too much yellow and my green areas weren't thick enough. So I went back in and did a little bit of touch-ups. Never be afraid to go in and fix your camouflage at all if it's not to your liking, because you can't really do this later on. You want to make sure you're happy with the camouflage. Some of the overspray, if you get a little bit, can be covered up by weathering later, so don't be too picky about that stuff. Just make sure that the shapes are to your liking. Yeah, these side skirt panels kept falling off. I guess the air would get underneath them and then pop them off. Just, it was always happening with me as I was painting these things. It was a little bit of a pain in the butt. You'll see it happen again right there. Yeah, I don't like side skirts. They look cool, but they are a pain in the butt to paint and also to weather. And they just get in the way of the tracks and everything like that. Alright, now we have our camouflage applied. And this actually came out looking really good. I was worried I wasn't going to get it quite looking the same way as the photo, but I'm actually quite pleased with it. It's not an exact copy, but it looks really, really good to me. It's got the same aesthetic, and I also did like how I left this one panel off, again, after the photos I was showing you earlier in the video, like right here. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up this video. I will do more videos on the rest of the weathering process on this vehicle. I just don't want this video to drag on to be an hour long or so. So we'll do a couple more videos on some more in-depth weathering processes later. But as it stands today, this model looks great. It's got that nice chipping effects, nice detailed painting, and of course the camouflage on the side and the markings I think look really, really unique. Again, this was all based off of some photos, and that was kind of the point of this video, showing kind of where I get my photos from and how I might use more than one photo, usually 2 or 3 or 4, to put them together to get a really interesting vehicle, because typically just an average photo doesn't have really that much to it. But if you have a bunch of interesting features from a number of little photos, you can put them together and make a really interesting model in the end. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them below. I always read through them all. And if you would like to support me, you can do that with the Patreon link on screen now. As always, I will see you guys next time. Goodbye, stay safe, and happy modeling. See ya.